Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Alessandro, and in today's video, I'm going to be bringing you guys my January through March reading wrap-up. As of the beginning of April, I have read 8 books so far this year. I've dealt with reading slumps, I've had some really amazing books, and I've also had some disappointing ones as well. And in this video, I'm really excited to share with you all that I've read so far. This video will be completely spoiler-free, and I'm going to go in chronological order from January 1st to the present. So I'm not really going to go in any specific order of like, oh, I liked this book the best and this book the least. I'm just going to go in order of what I've read so far. Before we get into the video though, please let me know in the comment section down below, what is your favorite book you've read so far this year? I'm always looking for new book recommendations, so please let me know. So without further ado, I think we should just get right into it. And starting off this year, I read a really interesting book because starting off my 2022 last year, I also read a mystery thriller book. And this year I started with In My Dreams I Hold a Knife by Ashley Winstead. I would describe this book as a dark academia-inspired mystery thriller book. This book follows 6 college friends coming back for their 10-year reunion on their college campus after during their senior year, the 7th friend in their friend group was murdered. So they come back for the first time, some of them haven't seen each other in over a decade, and there's a lot of stuff left unsaid and a lot of secrets that are still buried. Upon their return, however, they realize not all is well. Somebody on the campus is really determined to uncover what happened the night of their 7th friend, Heather's, murder. This book has dual timelines, so there's one timeline told in the present when all the friends are together at this reunion, and then there's also the timeline of when the 4 of them were in college throughout their 4 years. This book was really good. I ended up giving it 3.5 out of 5 stars. It wasn't my favorite mystery thriller book of all time, but it definitely kept me on the edge of my seat and turning pages. I think looking back on it, I really wanted to root for one of the characters, especially our unreliable narrator, Jessica. But I think the point of the book was more so that all these characters are a little bit morally ambiguous, and you're not really supposed to be rooting for anyone in particular. So I think looking back on that now, I understand that a little bit more. But overall, it was a very solid read. I had a really good time reading it, and I didn't see the plot twist coming at all. I think if you're someone who kind of likes these college settings, these dark academia campus settings, you might really enjoy this book. This book also had themes of like unrequited love, revenge, lots of hidden secrets that got revealed throughout the book, and much, much more. Now, the next book I actually read this year was The Bonashard Daughter by Andrea Stewart. This is an adult fantasy novel, and if you guys know anything about me, if you've been a subscriber of mine for a little bit, you know that I have a difficult relationship with fantasy novels of any kind. I tend to DNF them about 100 pages in because I can't get past the setup, or there's just something else holding me back about the books. But this book was a very pleasant surprise for me. I ended up giving this book 4 out of 5 stars, and I read it in about a week. The Bonashard Daughter takes place in a fictional empire called the Phoenix Empire, where the Emperor has been ruling this kingdom, this area for the past 100 years, using the power of bone shard magic to power his animal-like constructs. However, people in the kingdom are getting quickly tired of his rule, and Lynn, who is the Emperor's daughter, who's one of the main POVs we follow throughout the book, sees this revolution coming and decides she's going to take it upon herself to master her father's bone shard magic and succeed him as Emperor. However, there's a lot more to this book than just that, as we follow, I believe, 6 different point of views throughout different characters throughout the Phoenix Empire, and somehow Andrea Stewart, the author, manages to weave them all together in the end to make it make sense. I thought this book was actually really well done because the author did a really good job at explaining a very complex magic system. I would say sometimes when I was first getting into it, it didn't make a whole lot of sense to me, but I think you really have to keep reading and read a little bit closely to make sure you get all the fine details of it. But if you are paying attention and you are reading closely, I think this is going to be a really enjoyable read for you. This is another book that I would say is a good beginner fantasy novel. I know probably some people like high fantasy or really epic fantasy. I wouldn't really describe The Bonashard Daughter this way. I would describe it more as just like the first book in a fantasy trilogy that sets up a lot of the next few books, I'm guessing. But overall, I really enjoyed it as someone who is new to the fantasy genre. I think the main downfall of this book is that about at the 200 or 300 page mark, it really begins to lull, and some of the POVs begin to feel unnecessary. So for me, the 2 most interesting point of views were Lynn, who is the Emperor's daughter, who's kind of on this mission to regain her memories as she's dealt with a sickness that made her lose all her memories of the past 15 years. So she's on that mission to regain her memories and also master her father's bone shard magic in secret. And then one of the other POVs we follow is of a guy named Jovis, who is a smuggler on one of the outlying islands in the kingdom. And Jovis has kind of a complicated history as well, and he's searching for his lost wife. And I think these 2 were the most interesting POVs throughout the book. There were a number of other POVs that get introduced that are not as prevalent as Jovis's and Lynn's, but they just didn't feel like they added a whole lot, even though they did become relevant later on. I would say my favorite POVs were Lynn and Jovis, and those were the things that really made the book shine. So just keep that in mind, because I think a lot of people will tend to DNF this book around the 200 and 300 page mark, but I think if you can stick it out till the end, it will be very rewarding for you. Now, I know you guys are probably sick and tired of me talking about this next book because I literally mention it every single chance I can get, and this is the last book I read in the month of January, and that is The Charm Offensive by Alison Cochrane. I have a reading vlog for this book. It was in my Top Books of 2022 video, and I ended up rereading it as my last book in the month of January. This book just holds such a special place in my heart now. I won't go too in-depth with it as usual because I have a number of other videos dedicated to it on my channel, so if you want to, I'll leave the Charm Offensive reading vlog linked somewhere up here, and then you can also go to my Top Books of 2022 video to hear my more in-depth thoughts about it. But basically, The Charm Offensive is a male-male romance comedy book that is dual POV and takes place on the set of a show that is very similar to that of The Bachelor or Bachelorette called Ever After. Like I said, we follow two guys in this book, and one of them is Dev, who's a producer on the show Ever After. And Dev is someone who's kind of like a hopeless romantic. He's always believed in these fairy tales. He's been watching Ever After as a show since he was little, and it has been his dream to work on this show for a long time, and he has been doing so for a while now. We also follow Charlie, who is the prince or the bachelor of the show, and Charlie came on the show because he had a couple of issues in his personal life where he was ousted from his position as a tech CEO, and his publicist decided that, okay, you should come on the show to try and repair your image and show everyone in the tech world that you can work again. So originally, Dev is someone who's assigned to coach the contestants of the show, the women who are competing to marry Charlie, but in this book, he's reassigned to actually coach Charlie personally and help him through the process. But again, not all is just that simple, and as Dev and Charlie grow closer, a romance begins, and they have to begin to think about, well, we are two guys who are on this show. Charlie's supposed to marry a woman at the end of this. So what's gonna happen? How are we gonna navigate this? And whose story is gonna end up getting told at the end? Again, this book just holds such a special place in my heart because, again, I think I say this in every video I've talked about this book in, but the mental health and mental illness representation in this book was just outstanding. There are other romance books out there that I think deal with topics like anxiety and depression, but the way Alison Cochrane actively weaved these topics into the book made it so powerful. And it's not done in a tasteless or careless way where she's kind of says oh, this person has anxiety and it's hard for them. No, she's we're going to talk about it. This is central to my character's identity. This is something they actively work on, and it's important to their character. I'm someone who's really passionate about mental health advocacy in my own life, so just seeing this in this book and see how Alison Cochrane really made a good effort to weave it into the plot, weave it into the characters, and not just make it a side thing really meant a lot to me. And also, there are a lot of sweet and tender moments between Dev and Charlie as they have this sort of closed-door romance throughout the duration of the show. They have really, really good chemistry and really sweet moments, and I just love them so much. Upon my reread of The Charm Offensive, I ended up giving it 5 out of 5 stars, which is a really big deal because I do not give a lot of books 5 out of 5 stars. I would recommend this book to anyone who's looking for kind of a different sort of queer romance book that deals with topics in mental health, discovering your sexuality, and so much more as well. But I would also say that check the content warnings if you are someone who's triggered by discussions of OCD, anxiety, depression, and things like that. Just keep that in mind because those are very heavy topics throughout the duration of the book. Okay, so the first book I read in the month of February was The Lost Symbol by Dan Brown. This book is going to be a little bit difficult to describe without spoilers because a lot of the plot that I remember is going to be a spoiler if I try to describe it, so I'll do my best. For those of you who don't know, this universe that Dan Brown has written about the main character Robert Langdon comprises 5 books. So technically you can read these books in any order, which is what I did. This is the only Dan Brown Robert Langdon book that I haven't read yet. So like I said, we follow our fictional character Robert Langdon, who is a professor of symbology at Harvard. He's kind of a world-renowned symbologist. He's had a lot of scandals and adventures at this point, up to this point in this book, because there are technically 2 books that precede this, those books being Angels and Demons and the very popular Da Vinci Code. So this book follows Robert Langdon as he's just kind of another unassuming knight where he's summoned to the US Capitol building to give a presentation on symbols. However, once Langdon gets to the US Capitol building, he realizes quickly that he was lured there and that one of his close friends, Peter Solomon, was kidnapped. The kidnapper contacts Robert Langdon and says the only way that he can get Peter Solomon back is to kind of go through this mythical quest of some sorts. This is not a sort of fantasy quest thing. This is a very real book about American masonry, a lot of the American like myths and secret societies that we hear about. So that is the focus of the book. It's not really fantasy or anything, but it does talk at length about American Masonry, American secret societies, and things like that. This book was honestly really disappointing for me. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars because it was still good. But compared to Dan Brown's other books like The Da Vinci Code, Inferno, Angels and Demons, and Origin, which are the other 4 books in the Robert Langdon universe, this book just felt really lackluster to me, and I'm not sure if it's because my reading tastes have changed, as this is the first Robert Langdon book I've read in about 4 years. So I think that's certainly a possibility that I just don't really like this sort of historical influenced mystery thriller book as much anymore. Or maybe it's just because the books feel so incredibly dense with history, which I guess is not a bad thing if that is your cup of tea, but for me, I think I do enjoy more historical fiction books now, but I don't enjoy like super historical mystery thrillers, if that makes sense. If you are someone who's interested in unique mystery thriller books, I would actually highly recommend you read the other books in this series. Like I said, you don't have to read these books in order, they all can stand on their own, but my personal favorites are definitely The Da Vinci Code and then also Inferno, but the technical order of the books would be Angels and Demons, Da Vinci Code, Lost Symbol, I think Inferno, and then Origin. Like I said, overall, if you want a new mystery thriller book that has historical aspects to it, I would definitely recommend this, but I would start in publication order definitely with Angels and Demons, as that is a very strong first book. Okay, so now we're getting to the part of February where I entered the worst reading slump literally that I've ever experienced. I don't know what it was about this month. I think maybe after reading The Lost Symbol, I just wasn't in the mood to read. I was really disappointed with the book. I tried reading a number of other books at this time, including like some YA fantasy, some adult fantasy, some other contemporary fiction, and literally everything I read I just hated and could not finish. So when I picked up this next book, I was very surprised because I never thought I'd read another book by this author. I never thought I would read this book in particular either, and I ended up loving it, and that book was Malibu Rising by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I actually am of the very unpopular opinion, I think, where I don't like and I DNF'd The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, and I know that will get me canceled on the internet to the end of my days, but I honestly didn't like it, and I picked that book up even before it was really popular on TikTok and Instagram. So for me to read Malibu Rising, I was really skeptical, but I also wanted to try something kind of out of my comfort zone to see if I could get out of the reading slump I was in. Malibu Rising takes place, as the title implies, in Malibu of August of 1983. It's the night of the famous Rivas siblings' kind of end of summer massive party. The book takes place over 24 hours from the very beginning of the book, starting at like 7 a.m. the day of the party to the next day when the house has actually gone up in flames. But of course, in those 24 hours, a lot can happen, and including an out-of-control party, uninvited guests, a lot of other family secrets come up throughout the time as well, and the Rivas siblings are forced to reconcile some things they haven't thought about in a very long time. I'm just gonna say it right now, and this again will be completely spoiler-free, but this book was not really what I expected it to be. The way the synopsis goes and the way it's marketed makes it sound like the focus of the book is on the party and the 24 hours in the party, but I'm learning with Taylor Jenkins Reid's books though is that they almost always include like a present and a past timeline. So the first half of Malibu Rising is actually, I would say, the setup for the second half, where we follow the Rivas siblings as parents as they meet. They meet for the first time, and we kind of learn about the history of how the Rivas siblings all come together, about one of their parents, who's Mick Riva, the famous singer, who's actually one of the husbands of Evelyn Hugo, I hear. And so the first half of the book is kind of like how the Rivas siblings' parents met, their struggles, how Nina, our main character of the book, had to kind of like come into this position as an adult very quickly in her teenage years. And then the second half of the book picks up more at the party after kind of all the groundwork, all the setup has been established. Overall, this book was really interesting, and watching all the different point of views that happen, the point of views including the Rivas siblings' point of views, was really interesting for me. I think I kind of get the hype around Taylor Jenkins Reid's writing now because it is really good, it's really interesting, and it really does kind of pull at those heartstrings a little bit, because she'll just casually like end a chapter with like, this person died, and the next chapter, and it's just kind of like, what just happened? So for that reason, I think I'm probably gonna give The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo another chance one day. I just want to see what the tea is now. I'm really curious. And overall, I would recommend this book. I definitely would say it's a good starter book in the Taylor Jenkins Reid universe, and yeah, I just overall had a really good reading experience with it. Now, with this next book, I literally don't know how I'm going to talk about it with coherent sentences, because this book absolutely blew me away and really changed my perspective on fantasy books for the better. I loved every second of it. I thought the pacing was incredible. I thought the writing and the plot and the story was so unique and interesting. And that book is Jade City by Fonda Lee. I did take about 2 weeks to read this book, but it was 2 weeks well spent, and I think I really absorbed every second of it, and I'm really excited to read the next 2 books in the series. Jade City is an urban fantasy novel that takes place on the fictional island of Kekon, where there are two kind of warring gang families that are fighting for control of the capital city, Janloon. In these two families, there are people called Greenbone Warriors, who are these highly trained kind of martial arts fighters who use jade crystals to enhance their fighting abilities. This book is very political, very action-packed, follows a number of different characters who are complex and interesting, and overall was such a good fantasy book. Like I said when I first started talking about this book, I think what made it so good was the pacing. There were just so few moments that lulled or didn't have any action or anything really going on. The first 60 pages was where I first DNF'd it back in October, and I think if I pushed past those, I would have really loved it back then too. But I'm overall so glad I read this book now because it's giving like the Godfather mafia vibes with martial arts inspired fight scenes with political intrigue, complex characters, morally ambiguous characters. And it just was overall so good. I gave Jade City 4.5 out of 5 stars, and I would highly recommend it for you no matter what genre you read. I think I forgot to mention it, but Jade City was the first book I read in March, and then the other 2 books I've read so far are Never Been Kissed by Timothy Janowski, and then Him by, I think, Serena Bowen and Elle Kennedy. For these last 2 books, again, I'm not going to go too much in depth with them because I just did a whole 24-hour reading vlog for them, so I'll leave, again, that link somewhere up here where you can check out the reading vlog and check out my thoughts in depth. These were 2, again, male romance books, and they were very different from one another because Never Been Kissed was very sweet, very like coming of age story with very little smut and spice. And Him was the complete opposite. It was very spicy with almost no semblance of plot whatsoever. So starting with Never Been Kissed, we follow our main character Ren, who, like the title implies, has never been kissed. On his 22nd birthday though, he's feeling a little bit nostalgic and drinks a little bit too much and sends these kind of no-send letters to all of his pre-coming out crushes. Most of them don't respond, but one does, and this guy's name is Derek. And Derek is Ren's kind of like #1 crush that he had back before he went to college. So Derek responds and lets Ren know that he's actually going to be interning at the same drive-in theater that Ren works at for the summer, and then the story follows as the two reconnect and begin a relationship throughout the summer. The book was so sweet. I read it in like 2 days, I think, and it was just a very good lesson as far as I think romance in the kind of emotional and tender moments go. Because as you guys know, if you watched another one of my previous videos, I am drafting my own romance book, and it was really nice to see the way Timothy Janowski, the author, wrote these characters. Nothing felt forced, nothing felt like there was a lot of pressure on them to like be intimate with each other right away. There were a lot of moments where they just kind of could openly communicate and talk, and if there's anything I hate, it's miscommunication, so I'm really glad that this book did not have that in it, and the characters did actively openly communicate with each other. I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars on my initial read of it, but I have to be honest, looking back, I think it's more like a 3.5 out of 5 star. I think if you are someone who's kind of interested in like a new adult male romance book that doesn't have basically any spice in it whatsoever, you will really enjoy this. For me, the writing was the really biggest thing holding it back, and I think even though the writing wasn't very strong, I'm really interested to see what the author is coming up with next, as I think he does a really good job of writing characters and plots. On the complete flip side though, Him was extremely spicy and had spice and smut out the wazoo. Him follows 2 hockey players, one named Jamie and one named Ryan, and they've been friends forever. They went to the same hockey camp all throughout middle school and high school together, but on their last night of hockey camp during their senior year of high school, a kind of drunken, weird night of foolishness ends their friendship. They end up reconnecting after 4 years after they both finished college and have come back to the same hockey camp to be coaches for the summer. They reconnect and they kind of realize all these feelings they have for each other, and throughout the entire summer this book takes place, it is just spice, spice, spice. Kind of see what the authors were trying to do, adding a little bit of plot in there, because there are some talks about coming to terms with your sexuality and coming out to your family, but do not let that fool you. This book is mainly spice. And I think that's fine. There are some books that are just spice, and that's totally fine. But I just kind of think, for me personally, I prefer books with a little bit more plot and a little bit more balance between the spice and the non-spice. I initially gave this book 3 out of 5 stars because I did like it and the ending was surprisingly wholesome. But upon thinking about it, I think it's more like a 2.5 out of 5 stars. Not to say that it was bad, but again, it probably just wasn't for me. But there you have it. Those are the 8 books I've read so far in 2023. So while I'm definitely having a little bit of an up and down year with reading, with some books being disappointing, dealing with reading slumps, I'm overall having a really good time. I'm being very intentional with my choice of books this year and how much I'm reading. I'm not forcing myself to read books I don't want to read, and I'm in general not forcing myself to read when I don't want to. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you did, don't forget to give it a like and consider subscribing to my channel for more bookish content coming your way soon. Thank you again for checking out the video. My name is Alessandro, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!